Ready to build career skills in 2023? Apply to Wilmington University today and get started by March 6th. Learn more and apply at wilmu.edu. Upskill, reskill, or start fresh in 2023 with a degree or certificate from Wilmington University. Wilmu works for you. Apply today to start March 6th. What up? It is the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. Wilmu Works, Danny Pomels and Noah Levick, our producer Ben Barry, in the cut like some iodine, Band-Aid, whatever you want to fill in the blank with. Good to be with you. The Sixers coming off a W, as we expected, a redemptive win over the Orlando Magic after they walk through the second half, maybe even the second quarter if you want to add that in, and Monday's loss that snapped their 7-game winning streak. But Noah, the glass is half full. The Sixers won, albeit not as a convincing a win as you might expect. But we're here coming to you guys before the All-Star reserves are announced. So we'll get into a little bit of that and also talk a little bit more about this trade deadline that is quickly creeping up on us, and more information leaks out about what the Sixers might be interested in. But let's stay focused on last night's game, Noah. What were your takeaways? Doc Rivers stressing after the game that, hey, there was a chance several times we could have ballooned the lead to 21 points or something of that effect, but we just couldn't get over that 10-point margin, which kept Orlando in the game. But a win is a win, and on we moved as the Sixers hit the road. But what were some of your takeaways as they ended this 4-game homestand?
Yeah, well, if they had ballooned it to exactly 21 based on the previous game, that would not have been a safe lead.
That would not have been a harbinger of good things to come.
Exactly, right? But it did what they needed to do. I thought when Joel Embiid and James Harden were on the floor, they looked quite a bit better than the Magic, and this was a rough game for the Sixers' second unit. Tyrese Maxey really struggled. George Niang had an off shooting night, and Montrezl Harrell wasn't good. Doc Rivers actually took Harrell out of there early in the second quarter, gave Paul Reed his first legit run in a while, and that was entirely understandable because there continues to be this massive drop-off defensively when Montrezl Harrell's on the court versus Embiid. But the stars looked like all-star level players for the Sixers, and I think the highlight of this one is James Harden knocks down 6 threes and some timely ones as well. And those 6 are his most ever as a Sixer. So I think that's a little encouraging sign. And also, he was quite pleased to be asked about some of those threes being of the catch and shoot variety, an aspect of his game that he's worked on since landing here and is trying more and more to incorporate because he knows the Sixers need it. And he knows Joel Embiid will get on him if he's not taking open catch-and-shoot looks. Last night, he was putting them up and knocking down some important ones. As you said, not an especially sparkling win, but I think James Harden's performance was good, at least in that aspect. Again, some sloppy turnovers. I thought he had some lowlights defensively as well, but him just being a tough shot maker for this team when a game is tight and that is required. He, again, really decisively checked that box last night.
Yeah, it is really at a point where it's all about the fine tuning in some aspects with this Sixers team. They're at a point, third in the Eastern Conference, approaching the trade deadline to try to get a piece or two to make them a little more viable, particularly on the defensive end. But to me, there's the leadership by example and leadership by vocal, effect. And last night was a leading by example night for me, for James Harden. The double-digit assists, like you said, the defensive lapses you kind of have just come to accept in some aspects, but the team needed him to step up, and he did. They got the win against Orlando, and we move forward to the next game. And I wasn't as discouraged by Maxey playing poorly because I just still see the exuberant confidence that he just as drips off of him. We saw, some of those fast break deep threes just missing, back rim, but online, but just not on his game as far as that's concerned. But I wasn't as discouraged, and I don't think they are discouraged either. And I don't think you were saying that. I just feel like you wanted to see them kind of give the Magic team the business. They didn't quite do that. So where do you go from here? So I feel like it's just they go to the road trip and a little back against the wall mentality. I'm sure they'll rally and play well there as well. Not like they have tough teams here coming up necessarily, but all things considered, the Sixers keeping pace with those other teams in the conference. And if you were paying any attention to the Boston Brooklyn Nets game last night, it was 46-16 at one point. I felt like that was the way the Sixers should have handled Orlando, but nonetheless, a win is a win, and they're still there in that upper echelon as it stands right now, 33-17 on the year, 3 games behind Boston.
50 games, yeah, that's a little milestone. But yeah, not a tremendous performance, but they didn't need it to be. They really just needed to win this game and ensure they did not get swept in the mini series. And I do think Orlando is a better team than its record. Legitimately dealt with just a ridiculous amount of injuries early in the year. And you see a lot of these young players, they're promising, but in the here and now, they're also quite good. And yeah, the Sixers certainly, saw that. So yeah, next up will be San Antonio Spurs, and then I would not call the next two easy ones after that. You got the New York Knicks at the Garden, who will want a little revenge from the Christmas Day loss, and then you got the Boston Celtics in the final game before the trade deadline. So just 3 remaining before that deadline, and 33-17 sounds quite good, but I think last night, if we're being honest, does reflect the reality of this is a flawed team, as everyone is across the NBA. But man, it was a tough one when Joel Embiid was not off the court until James Harden stepped in there and, to a degree, saved the day early in the fourth quarter. I think that said, Orlando is an especially gigantic team. This is a group playing Bol Bol and Mo Wagner and a bunch of other 6'10 plus guys on the floor at the same time. So that's going to expose a lack of size inevitably. But the Sixers, at least at center, are small when Embiid's off the court. And sometimes they've dealt with that well and figured out solutions with zone defense and making the most of Maxi's speed in the bench lineups. But man, defensively, there continue to be real questions about whether they could hold up when Joel Embiid takes a seat. And he was really, I think, also great defensively last night, which just further, made it glaring how worse they were when he was not on the court.
Do you feel like we talked about this in the last podcast, but based on a report from Jason Dumas, which we did not talk about, friend of the podcast, Jason, sports director at Cron in San Francisco, Philly guy, his sources say that the Sixers are looking for a backup center, a shooter, or a backup point guard, and that Matisse Thybulle, they've received a lot of interest in Matisse Thybulle from various teams around the league. But it doesn't make sense for them to kind of cut off the nose despite the face type of thing, because if they get rid of their best defender to try to upgrade, it would have to be more of a surefire addition, right? Are you seeing that the same way? Like it kind of, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Like you get rid of Matisse, who makes your defense weaker because he's one of your best defenders, to try to upgrade in an area that you've continually tried to address, like backup center, and haven't had as much success there as you would want.
Yeah, I think just big picture, I would agree with that point. I think the counter is one that you touched on last podcast, which is just, well, if you can pick up a player who's more likely to be viable in the playoffs than Thybulle, then 20 minutes of good defense is better than.
Is that a tough, yeah. Can they split that hair? Is that can they actually see that through though, do you think?
I think it's really difficult. I think
Yeah.
Daryl Morey aggressively explores all options, and it is correct to do so. I mean, clearly Matisse Thybulle is attractive to some teams. I think, as I have mentioned, less so than a year or two ago when the playoff flaws were less apparent and more years were left on the contract. But yeah, no doubt, he's a dynamic player, and it makes sense that there's legit interest in him from multiple teams. But yeah, to me, I think it is unfortunately still valid to have concern about backup center. I think the positive slant on it, which Doc Rivers tried to express, is just you got options here. You do have Paul Reed, who has done okay in playoff series before. You have Montrezl Harrell, who can provide spurts of offense and energy when he's at his best. And then you have PJ Tucker, who's played center in the playoffs before and is honestly well equipped to guard centers, sometimes more than he is to guard, twos and threes. I think the classic example is how well he did in the second half of this game against Jokic recently. So the Sixers, I think, are not the worst team in the league at backup center by any means, but it's an important position. Joel Embiid has been hurt the last two postseasons, and they've got to treat this as a priority. So if they're able to improve at backup center, or they're able to add a bigger player who also might have a chance to be part of this mix in some way, then yeah, makes a ton of sense, from where I'm sitting.
Are you more focused and, like you said, Montrezl Harrell provides point production, but it seems like defense is the main area that they lose when Joel sits down. So are you primarily focused on like a Nerlens Noel type at backup center to like someone who can defend the rim, and maybe you're costing yourself maybe some offensive production? I would imagine you could just get that from other places if you can get a guy who can come off the bench and kind of hold down the fort, so to speak, defensively. That would be more appealing than someone who could. I mean, of course, you want someone who could do both things, but finding that person and not having to leverage, someone who's important to your roster is going to be difficult. So it's really the defense where we're most focused, right?
I think at least like the calculus of, Harrell, when he's on can give us 10 points. I don't see that as a big loss in terms of acquiring a player that would be likely to take Montrezl Harrell's minutes, especially because the second unit now looks, I think, much more capable offensively when Tyrese Maxey is leading the way, and presumably James Harden will be featuring in many of those Embiid list lineups come playoff time. So yeah, I don't know if you need to be super narrow in your desires at the backup center position. I just think if it's a good player that you think is superior to the current options, then great, provided that's doable and you're not giving up tons in return. You're having to thread really fine needles, of course,
Right.
on the trade deadline, but I don't think they're necessarily, advised to be picky and exactly what they want in their backup center. I think, sure, like more size would be great, more rim protection would be great, 3-point shooting would be really nice. Of course, we know like spacing around James Harden and tends to be really valuable. He also likes roll men, guys who can dive to the rim and catch lobs and all that. But players with enough positive qualities to potentially help you in a playoff series, great. Sounds like something this team could use. And it's just a question of whether they'll be able to find it for a price that Daryl Morey deems satisfactory. So going to be really interesting to see if he manages that, or to see if the Sixers ultimately end up riding with what they've got behind Embiid. I mean, I do think like they're 8-4 without him, and a lot of that's not the backup centers have been amazing necessarily, but the team does have depth, I think, to cope when Embiid is off the floor at times. But from where I'm sitting, no doubt that is a current area of concern.
It's time to rush to new rewards at Rivers Casino. Now there's a whole new way for you to earn, redeem, and level up your rewards. Go get your new Rush Rewards card and get more out of your game at Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Injured? For over 70 years, Lundy Law has been the #1 personal injury law firm in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Their services are exemplary. Their results are exceptional. Call 1-800-LUNDY-LAW to get the money you deserve. Opioid addiction is a national public health crisis. The Someone You Know podcast from the Independence Blue Cross Foundation offers inspiring stories that challenge stigma, offer hope, and humanizes the disease of addiction. Download the new season 3 of Someone You Know on all major podcast platforms. Coming in for a landing here on the Sixers Talk podcast. Quickly, Noah, two things. One, would you trade Trez, PJ Tucker, or someone else on the roster that is of their ilk in order to upgrade the backup center? Like we were talking about shipping away Matisse Thybulle, but are one of these other guys possibly, could you include them, or would they be more appealing to try to upgrade that, or would you be willing to do that?
I mean, just from my perspective, they're unlikely to be super helpful in the pursuit of a backup center the way Thibault would be. So, yeah, I don't think like Montrezl Harrell should be off the table in trade discussions if another team.
I mean, he is on a 1-year deal, so yeah.
Yeah, just hard to believe for me that would put a deal over the top. But sure, theoretically, if there's a move where Thibault, Korkmaz, and Harrell land you a player you really like, then I wouldn't hesitate. In that scenario, I think it's hard for me to imagine PJ Tucker moves here for a ton of reasons. But yeah, if Harrell is for some reason appealing to another team, then fair enough. If the Sixers end up parting ways with him, not something that I would anticipate personally, though.
Quickly, we are here with 7 reserves in the East and 7 in the West to be named later today. We're going to assume that Joel Embiid, the leading scorer in the league, is going to be among those 7 reserves because he was not elected as a starter. James Harden, the theoretical assist leader in the league, once he plays enough games to qualify, may not make that cut. But for my 2 cents, I am not concerned. Like that, to me, like that's something that teams who aren't trying to win a championship should be concerned about. Like this is something that James has played in 10 All-Star games. Joel has played in multiple All-Star games and started multiple games. Listen, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, so what? They're bigger and better, more things to be concerned about. But I sympathize with them for wanting to do it because of the hard work and effort that they put in, and to be, lauded for that is really important. But I don't think it's something they should really be focused on.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, Harden didn't sound like he was caught up in it. He did say, of course, it would be a blessing. Joel Embiid, amusingly last night, with a smile, said, "I don't know if I'll be voted a reserve. I think we all assume there's a 99.9% chance that the coaches will deem him worthy." In my mind, James Harden does deserve to be an All-Star. I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of being a challenging player to game plan against as an opposing coach, to me, it's a no-brainer. Like James Harden is just the middle of the Sixers offense and the hub in so many ways, and just makes them so much more dynamic and more difficult to defend. So, and the production this year has been really excellent. We're talking about a guy averaging over 20 points and 10 assists and leading a team with a 33-17 record. So that's won 21 of 26 games. So I think James Harden is an all-star caliber player, even at 33 years old. And I think he's been quite a bit better than he was overall in the second half of last season. But absolutely, if he gets snubbed, not a big deal. and nothing that I think will bother him a ton or that should, bother the Sixers to any great degree. But yeah, they should have two All-Stars, in my humble opinion. I think both those guys should be playing out there in Salt Lake City.
Well said, sir. He is Noah Levick. Check out his work on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. I'm Danny Pommells for Ben Berry. This has been the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works. We'll see you next time.